Good evening. I'm Bradlee Graham, co-owner, along with my wife Lissa, of Politics and Prose. And on behalf of everybody here at the store, I'd like to welcome you. As those of you who attend our events know, we try to have an author come as soon as possible after his or her book is released. Most times, the authors will have appeared in at least one or two other places before reaching P&P, or will have given interviews to news organizations. But tonight, we actually have a world exclusive. This is the first time that Jeff Himmelman is speaking publicly about his new biography of former Washington Post editor Ben Bradlee. And the book, Yours in Truth, has already generated some heated controversy. The controversy flared last week when a portion of the book was excerpted in New York Magazine, and the fallout has had as much to do with another great Washington Post legend, Bob Woodward, as it has with Ben Bradlee. I'll leave it to Jeff to address the substance of the disputes, but by way of introduction, let me just say that the biography is nearly 500 pages long and contains considerably more than the news stories so far have covered. I found the book quite engaging, and it certainly captures the much celebrated Bradlee in all his energy, flair, courage, profanity, charisma, and impact. Jeff had remarkable access to Bradlee's personal papers, to Bradlee himself, and to many who have known Bradlee. Jeff came to this project as a friend of the Bradlee family and also as a friend and collaborator of Woodward's, who was Jeff's journalistic mentor. In fact, Jeff takes up the first 30 pages or so of the book with a lengthy description of how the project evolved. That is, how it was initially envisioned as a book to be written with Bradlee became instead a book by Jeff about Bradlee. And Jeff notes that early on, he began to sense the trickiness of writing, as he puts it, about your mentor's mentor. There's quite a bit of Jeff himself in this book, which is aptly subtitled A Personal Portrait of Ben Bradlee. At times, the book becomes as much about Jeff's own journey of discovery about Bradlee and Jeff's encounters with Woodward as it is an account of Bradlee's life. Jeff plans to speak for about 20 minutes or so and then take questions. If you'd like to ask a question, please step up to the microphone here in the center of the room. And afterwards, Jeff will remain to sign copies of his book. So please, if you haven't already, silence your cell phones and join me in welcoming Jeff Himmelman.
Thank you all so much for coming. It's a real honor to be here. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. I had a couple of disclaimers, but I just had a conversation with the folks at C-SPAN, and what I was going to say is that I was forbidden from using blue language, and it's very difficult to either read from my book or talk about Ben Bradlee without being able to use curse words. So I'm very happy that I'll actually be able to give you Ben in full color. For those of you who read as Bradlee was saying, and for those of you who read the review of the book in the Post this Sunday, for those of you who have come to hear me talk about my book about Bob Woodward, I think you're going to be disappointed. This book is about Ben, and I think what Bradlee was saying about it being a 500-page book and a real portrait of who this person is true. And so what my goal here is tonight is to convey some of who Ben is to you in the hopes that you will find him as captivating as I did and enjoy reading about him. So as a quick word, I started working actually with Ben and not writing about him. I ended up writing a book with his son, Quinn. But before that happened, as I was working with Ben, the first thing he did was he gave me access to his archives. And so it wasn't the whole thing at first. It was just a big set of boxes with a bunch of letters. So the way that I got to know Ben, he was sitting in his office, but I was petrified of going in to talk to him. So the way I got to know him was through his letters. And so I thought I would read a few of the ones that I loved at first to you in the hopes that you'll get a sense of how I got to know him. The first letter that appears in the book is one of my favorites. It's from 1977. And a man had written to Katharine Graham, who was the publisher of the Post and the owner of the Post and Ben's boss. And he mentioned that her father and her former husband must be turning over in their graves because of the way you are dragging down what used to be a wonderful newspaper. In my humble opinion, I think the persons really responsible for the Washington Post's decline are Benjamin C. Bradlee and Philip L. Jalin, who was the editorial page editor. I hope the day is not too far off when you fire those two Peckerwoods. This is Ben's response. Dear Mr. Dodderidge, your letter to Mrs. Graham reminded me of the story about W.C. Fields sitting with a drink in his hand in his garden one afternoon. His secretary interrupted him repeatedly to tell him that a strange man wanted to see him and refused to say what he wanted to see him about. Finally, Fields told his secretary to give the man, quote, an equivocal answer. Tell him to go fuck himself. That's Benjamin C. Bradlee. But it's not all like that, and it's important, you get that flavor of Ben. But another of my very, very favorite of the letters that I came across very, very early is he appeared on a panel, and the editor, or the publisher of the Pueblo Chieftain had watched this panel, and he said, how ironic it was to watch you display your arrogance as you criticized a media credibility study which reveals that the public views the press as being arrogant. And after another sort of paragraph of going after Ben, he signed the letter cordially and sincerely. And so this is Ben's response in full. Editors do run the risk of appearing arrogant if they choose to disagree with anybody who calls them arrogant. You sound like one of those publishers who aims to please his pals in the community and give them what they want. No one will call you arrogant that way. No one will call you newspaper man either. I'm so happy I can curse, by the way. This really opens up all kinds of possibilities. So another quick one. This is one that my wife loves. This is a letter to an old DC editor named Frank Waldrop, who was kind of a legend of the journalistic scene way back when. This is from 1982. Dear Frank, I'm late in answering your letter. It isn't that I have all that goddamn much on my alleged mind, beyond imminent fatherhood, trying to thwart CBS's plans to steal Woodward for $500,000 or thereabouts, worrying about some new raspberry plants I just put in, and generally feeling up to my ass in midgets. The final story I'll tell about Ben's language has been told before, but some of you probably don't know it. It's a very famous story, and it was told at his retirement roast in the newsroom in 1991 when he left the paper. And there's a style reporter named Tom Lippman, and he was a self-described kind of expert on usage and grammar. And so at one point, Ben's secretary at the time, Debbie Regan, kind of scuttled over to him, and she said, I have a question for you. And he said, Debbie, what is it? And she said, is dickhead one word or two? So that gives you a sense of the color of who Ben was. And I mean, literally every time I would walk into his office, it would be another thing. So I would bring him a letter, and I have this in the book. I would bring him a letter, and I'd say, gosh, did you work hard on this letter, or did you think about this? And he said, the number of letters I wrote twice you could put in your ear. The man does not mess around. It's obviously about more than the letters, and the book is about a lot more than the letters, although the letters are really the heart of the book, and the primary documents that I came across in the course of this research and reporting are really the heart of the story, because they tell the story of Ben in a way that is almost shockingly true to his public image. And that's one of the most interesting things I discovered, is that this is a man who privately didn't pull any punches, just like he doesn't publicly. But one of the most interesting things about him, and I sort of start the proper chronology of the book after the introduction with this moment, is a lot of what people will describe who have known him is his personal charisma, his way of being. And in 1969, there was this this psychiatrist who came to interview Ben, and Ben participated in something called the Grant Study, which was a longitudinal study of Harvard students, 268, I think it was. I have the number in the book. But over the course of this interview, which is 18 pages long, the memo of it that this psychiatrist took, this guy kind of falls in love with Ben. And so you're reading 18 pages and you watch this process unfold, and it's staggering. And he concludes, it's an 18-page typewritten report. He concludes, I left the interview feeling that I had greater capacity as a human being just from having known him. And then he penciled in by hand, the psychiatrist, an illusion, yes, but what in a personality creates that illusion in others? And if you want to know what the heart of Ben Bradlee is, why he was such a successful newspaper editor, that's it. That's it. He made people feel that they had a capability to go out and get it. And he inspired the whole newsroom to do that. And ultimately, that's the first thing in the book in the proper chronology, because ultimately that's what you need to know. But it's about a lot more than charisma, as you can imagine. And one of the first historical episodes I include in the book is the Pentagon Papers.